Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, welcome to another episode of Creative Piecemeal. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi, and today I am joined by musician and band leader of the Alex Mendham Orchestra, Alex Mendham. Before we get started, I just want to give a shout out to all my listeners in France. Bonjour, and thank you for listening. Alex Mendham, mesmerized from a young age by the music of the forgotten time, is a musician, singer, and lyricist, and he made a name for himself, having burst onto the scene by forming his own orchestra at the tender age of just 20, and refusing to slow down ever since. He spent his youth studying the saxophone and meeting the last surviving dance band musicians from the golden era, living links to the past, including the virtuoso Gallodoro, a star of the 1920s Paul Whiteman fame, and he also spent several years as protégé to Bob Wilber, himself a student of Sidney Bechet. After the initial performances with his orchestra, Alex soon realized what was needed was an authentic vocalist and frontman, and he exchanged his saxophone for a conductor's baton, and the rest, as they say, is history. If you're a fan of music from the 20s, 30s, 40s, I highly recommend. I own several CDs myself, and the Alex Mendham Orchestra, fantastic, soothing, wonderful music, and I absolutely love it. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Tammy. It's great to be invited, and I've been looking forward to this all week. I look forward to getting stuck into these questions.
Excellent. Me too, especially as a lover of music from that bygone era. This is just so wonderful to have you here, be able to bend your ear a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So we're going to start off with who or what inspired you to become a musician?
I think I lay the blame at my mum. You know, every time there was a bit of a quiet, we would put on a black and white film, or there would always be black and white films showing in our house on British television during the day. And it would be anything from Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers to Charlie Chaplin or these Busby Berkeley musicals. So there was always, you know, this kind of music infiltrating the family home. And we also, as kids, we also watched the films, the Disney films. So there were great performers and artists. I didn't know at the time, I was only a kid, but when I'm watching things like The Jungle Book, you've got some great trumpet work and singing by Louis Prima and all of this kind of stuff. And I thought, this is what I want to do. So my mom, she got us a piano, and I would always listen to some of the great music in the living room on the television, and I would go and try and recreate it in the hallway on the piano. You know, I don't know what it sounded like as a kid, but it was great fun. And I was always encouraged, you know, by my parents to get into music, and that was just my thing. And the one turning moment for me was when we were in school, in primary school. I must have been about 8 years old, and they invited a lady to come in to a school assembly, and she brought in with her a family of instruments, and she demonstrated them all. And then the very last instrument was a saxophone, and she picked up this thing, and I saw this, you know, like this golden instrument, and I said, wow. And then she played it, and I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to play the saxophone. And I didn't know then that you could do it for a living. It's just something that I got really excited about, and I begged my parents to hire me a saxophone from the local council, and I just went from there, really. And then I started listening to music from the 20s. The other thing was, I really didn't know what to listen to. So I didn't really connect with a lot of music that was being listened to by my friends, you know, like rap artists and, you know, things like Britney Spears at that time was big and all this kind of stuff. I'm just thinking, yeah, that's not really me. But there was a local music shop that opened, and this was the days before YouTube and before Spotify, any of that kind of stuff. And they had this system where you could scan a barcode from a CD, and you could listen to maybe 20 seconds of each track before you decided to buy the CD. And I went straight to the jazz section because I thought, well, I play the saxophone, so maybe I'm going to, be a jazz musician or listen to jazz. I picked up an album, a CD by Bix Beiderbecke, who was a great cornetist in the 20s. And I think that it was just by chance I scanned this barcode in, and then the first few bars of this CD were just mesmerizing. I was just blown away. And I thought, this is the music I want to play. I got to find out who plays it today. I got to meet those people. I got to form a band, got to get into this stuff. So that was my early exposure to this music. And that was my start really at thinking I need to be a musician.
That's really fantastic. And I was also always drawn toward the older music.
Yeah, I never followed the crowd. I was never one of those guys. I mean, when I was at school, I think that a lot of people were trying to discover who they were, find themselves. And then you end up, trying to like the music that your friends like so that you can, create friendships and bond with people at that age. But I found that I never could do that. I couldn't convince myself that I liked that music. So I was always the weird kid on the bus with my earphones in, listening to this stuff and occasionally, people would sit next to me and they say, "What are you listening to?" But I was just that weird kid, and I just enjoyed that music, and that was it, really.
That's wonderful. And that's okay, though. It made it who you are, and you were able to fulfill a wonderful music dream. I mean, I'm always amazed. It's like, it's hard to get a whole bunch of musicians together and make a career out of it. And you've just done wonderfully. Wonderful.
Thank you. It's been an uphill struggle the whole way, let me tell you.
It's always difficult making a living in the arts, but it's worth it for the sake of the art, if it's something that a person wants to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
What are some of the barriers that you've encountered when, putting your band together and sort of getting to the level of success that you're at?
Well, I always found when I was listening to interviews with older jazz musicians or seeing them on television, and they would always say these magic words: we've got to get young guys and gals interested in this music, and we've got to get them involved, and we've got to bring them on. That's the future of this music. But that's just a soundbite. When you, in the real world, sometimes come across musicians of an older generation, there's not that much work to go around. So I found one of the barriers to getting into this music were the older musicians. That might be controversial, I don't know, but I just got to say it because that's what I found. And I don't feel like that there were those links. When I read books about people like Bix Beiderbecke and all these great musicians from the 20s and 30s, there would be all these wonderful stories about, oh, he just brought his trumpet along, he just brought his clarinet along, and we let those guys sit in, and the music was fantastic, and that's how they learned. And I think that was probably the case then, when there was a lot of work to go around. But learning this music from my older peers was difficult. I had to work hard to find those contacts who would open the door to this music and show me things and tell me things that, I think that a lot of this stuff is learned on the job. So, when you're doing gigs, you learn what not to do and how not to do things, sometimes, like small things like how to write an email to the people that own the club and or the venue and try to get gigs, that kind of stuff. So that was a barrier. The other barrier was to try to find younger musicians who are interested in the music. I found that there were mostly in the UK, I don't know whether this is the same case in the United States, but here there are two schools of jazz musicians or people that want to interpret the music from the 20s and 30s. There are either those that are great at the feeling, they really get the feel of the music and the energy, or there are those that can read the music, but you don't get much crossover between the two. So I could get guys in that were my age who could read everything on the written page and they could play beautifully. But when it came to reinvigorating this music from the 20s and 30s, they didn't quite get it. Or you got people that really got it that couldn't read the parts because they were too hard. So it's been a real uphill struggle trying to find musicians that can read the parts and also bring that energy that is required to interpret this music so that it's immediate and relevant and as exciting as it was in the 20s and 30s. And the other thing with my music is it's not strictly jazz. and it's not strictly film score music, it's not orchestral music. So one of the struggles I've found, especially communicating to people like promoters, is trying to get across what kind of music this is, because we don't really fit in a jazz club setting, and we don't always fit in a concert hall setting. It's that period right between ragtime and swing that's a forgotten period, so to speak. And so it's been difficult to communicate that to people. So that's been another barrier. I don't know. I mean, there's so many barriers. I could go all day. Yeah, like going into clubs where there's no lighting. So you've got musicians saying to you, you know, no music, no lights, no music, and trying to promote things. When I got started with my first band, I managed to convince a club to allow us to perform on their dark nights, you know, the nights that they were closed on a Monday and Tuesday. In those early days, you know, I was very green. I didn't know anything. I just assumed that if you put an event out online, people would turn up. And I had a band and I promised them all a fee. It's Monday, Tuesday night, I'll give you £60, so like $80 each. And please, you know, tell your friends about it, tell your family about it. Hopefully we'll get, you know, people down to the club. Anyway, the first night was dead. And so from day one with the band, I was $800 in debt. I did that again a second night. And then on the third night, most of the people there were my friends and family, or my band's friends and family. So everything was completely free or comped. So there was no money to pay the band. And I think most sane people at that time would have said, you know, this is really difficult. I'm not going to keep going with this. But I did, because I loved the music and I knew that there would eventually be an audience, but it takes time, and it's been 10 years now almost, and we've managed to find an audience in the UK, in Europe, in the US, and we're really starting to hit our stride now at the same time when a lot of the older big bands may be going into retirement, or there aren't really many orchestras now that specialize in this music going anymore. So it's one thing to earn a living out of this and to keep the band going, but on the second on the, you know, the other side of the coin, I want to keep this music going for the music's sake, because it's valuable music and culturally it's very important, I think.
Oh, completely. I mean, it really represents some very historic times in the world, and the music sometimes completely juxtaposes what's going on in the real world. Other times it's a complete reflection of what's going on in the world at the time.
Yeah, you know, my favorite period of this music is the late 20s and the early 30s. And the music at that time, popular music, was so joyful and vibrant and anti-establishment. It's just really invigorating. And I think when you look at what was really going on in the world, it was the opposite end of the spectrum. Everything was the Great Depression. People were out of work and they didn't have money. But there's a wonderful quote from a great banjo player from the 20s, a guy called Harry Reeser, and he used to play all through the Midwest. And he had a string of dates during the Great Depression, and every night the dance hall would be full to the rafters of people dancing and having, you know, the time of their lives. He turned to a sideman who was playing in the band and he said, you know, I can't believe that people don't have enough money for bread, but they've got enough money to come out and dance. And I think that really is, you know, that exemplifies the spirit of the time, where people didn't have much, but at the same time they had everything. They could go out and they could dance to a band and have, you know, have the time of their lives. Because I think that mirrors what's really going on now in the world to a degree, where things are hard, but we're coming out of this, you know, very difficult time. And yet people are looking to the music of our orchestra and thinking, this is uplifting, this is raising spirits. And this is why this music was created.
Yes, definitely. And, you know, especially when you study the history of any musical time period and you dig deep, whether it's big band music or Beethoven or something, you know, you're able to see the historical significance and notice how the music directly is impacted by what's going on in the world. And like you said, especially now, we've come out of some, and are still in, some rather historic times. And I find myself listening to the music of the 20s and 30s and 40s more because I feel like I can relate a little bit more. I didn't obviously live 100 something years ago, but like, okay, I can feel it. There's struggle in these people's lives and they're just trying to make it through and express themselves and make music and just get from one day to the next.
Absolutely. And it's given the orchestra things to look forward to as well. I mean, a friend of mine, Rusty Frank, who's a wonderful tap dancer in California, she told me a story of a tap dancer who lived to almost 100. And she said, well, what's the secret of your long life? And the dancer said, always have something to look forward to. So whenever there's been a performance on the horizon for the band, or we're doing live stream sessions now, it's given us things to look forward to, and it's really brought us through all of this bad stuff, really. And I think that the same is probably true for the musicians of the 20s and 30s. They had hard times, but they were playing some great music, and people were writing music at the top of their craft. You know, you had the Gershwins, Isham Jones, Cole Porter. They contributed music that is timeless, really. And I think that word really is at the heart of this music. It's timeless. If it's done properly and interpreted in the right way, it just transcends time.
I completely agree. It's timeless, it's beautiful, it's a wonderful stamp on history that, you know, that you're keeping alive. You know, you're helping people remember, or even just younger people just rediscovering a whole nother genre of music that's just wonderful.
Yeah. One of the most memorable gigs for me so far is when I took the orchestra to Paris. There's a beautiful restaurant near the Arc de Triomphe called La Coupole, and they have a wonderful vintage scene out there where people, you know, they dress in the clothing, and we performed, you know, up until about 2 a.m. in the morning, just great music from the 20s and 30s. And a lot of the people that were there were in their 20s and 30s, and they would have been the same age of people enjoying this music for the first time. And up until we had performed there, people only experienced this music through YouTube videos or on CDs. But when they heard the orchestra in person playing this music, sometimes, you know, from original sheets, they just said, wow, this brings a whole new dimension to this music. We didn't realize how, you know, invigorating it was, how powerful the band is up close and in person. It's such a big sound. I don't think there's ever been a party like it. It was just fantastic to see people dancing and enjoying this music the way it was enjoyed, you know, almost 100 years ago. It was mesmerizing.
That sounds wonderful. Definitely on my bucket list of things to experience in life is to see your band, and ideally in sort of that historic time capsule setting. You know, I hope you guys are going to continue doing things of that nature once it's safe to do so.
Absolutely. I mean, so La Coupole in Paris, that's a historic restaurant. I think that's been there almost 100 years. We've been invited to perform again at the Cicada Club in California, which is, I think it's a 1928 men's clothing store that's been restored and made into a club, which is absolutely stunning. You know, of course, we've got the Queen Mary. We've played at the Blackpool Tower Ballroom. We play at a lot of theatres and concert halls, but there's an added element of magic when we get to perform in a venue that's the same period as the band. It just brings the venue to life, and, you know, seeing people there in the right attire and just enjoying this music, feeling it, and you can see in their faces. You just think, well, that makes the whole thing worthwhile. The whole struggle, all the rehearsals, all the early starts, everything just makes it all worthwhile. And to give people, you know, the opportunity to hear music that you can't hear live anywhere else. There's just something magic about it, I think.
I remember, you know, after discovering your band, that was several years ago now, and just being blown away and thinking, okay, why don't they have this in the United States? Why aren't there more bands like this? You know, there's so many musicians who could be doing this for a living, and it's like just your special band doing all this amazing stuff. And it's so niche, I think, but you guys are blazing a trail, I think, for future musicians to be able to do things along the lines of what you're doing, and be able to get work recreating music of the times, and just really being able to a whole new level of people who appreciate that, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of this has taken hard work, but I think the biggest ingredient, I think, is imagination. So I went to New York and I saw a guy called Vince Giordano, who's provided a lot of music for Woody Allen's films and Boardwalk Empire. And I saw how he led the band in New York, and it's a big success. You know, he's still going now. And I thought, there is nothing like this in London. I thought it could be done better, and I think it could have been, it could be done bigger. And I thought, if nobody else is going to do this, I've got to do it, because there's no other band doing it. And I wanted to couple, what he was doing with the music so well with what I saw when I was a youngster watching these black and white films, because I think going out to see live music is an experience, and people want to buy into that experience, not just of the music, but to feel like they've gone somewhere, done something different. And I think that you're only going to get that if you can costume the musicians and just make everything just that little bit extra special. So, like the females that perform with the orchestra, they've all got custom made dresses that are close to, dresses worn by Ginger Rogers from some of her famous films in the 30s. And, we've got makeup team, we've got a hair team. So everything is, as high as it can be. And I think that the audiences get an added element to the musical experience when it's like, I was speaking to a friend the other day who was a dancer, and I said to her, it's a bit like you can have the choreographed dance perfect. You could be rehearsing this dance for months and months, but it's not the same until you've got the costume on and you're waiting in the wings ready to go on. And I think that's the same with the musicians. When they come to me and I say, try this tux on, it might be from 1930, and they smell it and they say, oh, it smells like, mothballs. Why do I have to wear this thing? But then when they put it on, they think, oh, I can hold myself differently. I'm sitting upright, I'm paying attention. I'm living that role of a musician from the late 20s or early 30s. And most importantly, I play differently. Some of the guys, when we do rehearsals, they turn up in jeans and Converse, Converse All-Stars, and it's not the same thing. But then when we're ready to go on and we're all, hair slicked back and they're living the part, it could be anywhere. It could be, a Mayfair hotel in 1933 or a Hollywood film set in the 20s. And I think that's the difference. That's the defining difference with the band.
And I must say, I really appreciate that you guys take it to that next level and get historically accurate style costumes and hairdos and makeup. And I was also wondering, being a musician, about the instruments, because, back then clarinets and saxophones and the reeds and other things that are made are sometimes by companies that are not necessarily around anymore. Do you guys track down instruments from that time period?
Yes, we do. Sometimes it is really difficult. So the drum kit that you see in a lot of our photographs and on that belongs to me. I found that in a collector's house many, many miles away from where I am, and it was just sitting there. It'd been untouched for almost 80 years. He got it from a band leader who lived up until his 80s, and it had been sitting there untouched. And he said, Alex, I've been following the orchestra. I want you to have this and give it a new life, because when it was being played, it was in a band like yours. And so I think, it's going to the right owner. So give it a new lease of life. So that's one thing. The musicians in the band, they often play vintage instruments that they own themselves for various reasons. I think the build quality of a lot of these instruments from the 20s and 30s is a bit like a classic car, really. It's going to handle slightly different to, like a modern car. It's going to have its quirks, but there are going to be things that it can do that modern instruments can't do. So they often gravitate towards owning a vintage trumpet or a vintage saxophone or a vintage guitar. Most of the guys in the band have period instruments. That's another side to it, really. It's I never want to make the orchestra so that it's a museum piece. I'm not a fan of museums in the sense that you go to see something and it's locked behind a wall or, behind a glass, like a glass shield. But I want there to be some element of history when you come to see the orchestra. So history, but in action, really. It's not a museum piece. I want the guys to interpret the music as if they are there in the moment, living it, rather than being nostalgic and thinking back. It's got to be fresh, and it's got to be hard-hitting, like a lot of this music was at the time. What a lot of people don't consider is this music that we play now from the 20s and 30s. In that period of time, a lot of people were writing about this music as if it was the punk rock of its day. So, it's blasphemic, jazz is the devil, it's an underground thing that, young women shouldn't be going out to these dances unaccompanied, and all of this kind of stuff, which is the same that's being written about every cutting edge piece of music ever since. And I want there to be a sense of that it is edgy and it isn't, performed by a bunch of old guys in a boring band. It's young guys. And it's full-bodied, it's exciting, and it's new. And if you can feel that way about music from 1929, I think that's really, really cool.
Definitely. I mean, I think there's an audience out there. It's just really a matter of what speaks to someone, and I think it's fantastic that you guys have the period instruments and the costumes and things, because it lends credibility to the way that you're playing it and authenticity. But it also, like you said, you're not necessarily recreating it. You're just playing the music fresh with the tools from the old days and making something new with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, more from Alex Mendham. Do you love music of the golden age? I encourage you to check out Alex Mendham and his orchestra. This unique group is a mainstay of BBC Radio and brings music from the 1920s and 30s alive, from period instruments to their outfits. Want to hear a live stream or see them in concert? Check out their website, alexmendham.com, for all the latest. And as always, thanks for listening. And we're back with Alex Mendham of the Alex Mendham Orchestra. Always excited to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
We're gonna switch gears. I'm very curious. So who are some of your favorite composers, both like from the big band era and also earlier?
My favorite composers, I think there's a handful of composers, I would say, from the 20s and 30s that I look to a lot for inspiration. And they would be the brothers Gershwin, George and Ira, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin. I love Isham Jones, some of the things that he wrote, but I would say, yeah, they're the big four, I would say. Irving Berlin, but they all represent something completely different, of course. They're similar in some ways, but I mean, Irving Berlin would write things that for me they're quite timeless, and they always go to sort of base emotions. I think because Irving Berlin was, like an immigrant, and when he was first writing songs, I don't think he had a great command of the English language, but he knew the emotions he wanted to convey through his music. So they're always, in a sense, quite simplistic. So things like Always, like I'll Be Loving You Always, is a wonderful, the waltz that he wrote. And Isham Jones would write things, sometimes things that directly related to his life. And like I'll See You in My Dreams was written after his wife sadly passed away. And I always think about those things when I'm either programming or performing those songs. The Gershwins, they're very witty and quite urbane and sophisticated, and they were young during the 20s, and I think a lot of that music comes across as quite experimental for the time. Things like Fascinating Rhythm with its unusual rhythmic structure. I mean, there's so many people at that time, and they all did different things. They were all wonderful. Leo Robin and Ralph Ranger, who wrote for Bing Crosby, and Harry Barris, who wrote things like Wrap Your Troubles in Dreams and Dream Your Troubles Away. I think that the main difference for me of songwriters and composers from that time compared to any other time was the sincerity. I really believe a lot of the songs from that period, Harry Barris, as we just said, wrap your troubles in dreams and dream your troubles away. I feel like he meant those words. And I think that he felt that a lot of people at that time were troubled. And the only way out of that situation, if you haven't got the money to buy your way out of that situation, is to feel that you're in a better place than you are, to sort of dream. And I think that those songs they're beautiful and they're timeless, and I feel a lot of what they felt. I think earlier composers, before that time, I love a lot of the writers from the British Music Hall, which is a tradition that I'm not sure that you have much of in the States, although in the US their equivalent would be vaudeville. So we had a great tradition in Victorian England of silly songs, comedic songs and comedic performers. Some of those really appealed to me. And before that, classical composers, obviously, people like Beethoven and Bach and Brahms. And I really love Stravinsky and Ravel, even some obscure 20th century composers from the US, people like Eastwood Lane, who wrote some wonderful impressionist pieces. That has really been channeled through people like Bix Beiderbecke, that great cornetist. They were a lot of his influences. So it's been almost me digging back. So, I was interested in Bix and his compositions. So he was a cornetist, but also a wonderful impressionist composer. He wrote a suite of wonderful compositions in the late 20s. And his influences were Ravel, Debussy, Stravinsky, and Eastwood Lane. And so I've checked out a lot of that stuff, and it's beautiful music.
It is. Yeah, there was a lot going on in the music world at that time, for sure, across all genres.
Yeah, there's amazing, cross-pollination of ideas. So you had in 1924, Rhapsody in Blue with Paul Whiteman, who commissioned that piece they had a wonderful concert at Aeolian Hall, and his piece was, Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue was debuted then. Also on the program, the very same night, they had, people recreating the original Dixieland Jazz Band from the early 20s. So they were really trying to, at that time, put classical music on the same shelf as jazz music and trying to do this symphonic jazz style, which is where you get elements of jazz flavoring in things like Rhapsody in Blue. And in a lot of Bix's compositions, you have that strange mixture of almost stride piano from people like Fats Waller mixed in with the beautiful ideas of European composers and people like Debussy, almost on top, sprinkled, And it's and a lot of these novelty piano type composers at that time, like Zez Comfrey, would do things like Kitten on the Keys, which is novelty piano, but it's so intricate and virtuosic that it almost calls upon that classical knowledge as well. And that is what I found with musicians in my band as well. So a lot of the people that come to me and play in the band, they've come from a classical background rather than a jazz background because of the discipline that it takes to interpret these pieces. So it's an interesting mixture of stuff.
It certainly is. I'm curious, what is your favorite, if you have a favorite, piece to do with the orchestra?
Favorite piece to do with the orchestra? One of the pieces I like to play with the band. It's very difficult for me to pick a particular piece that I enjoy to play because I love playing with the band, and one of the thrills I get is playing new things. So digging something out from the archives and just handing it out to the band and seeing how they'll interpret that particular piece. But one of the pieces I enjoy playing and singing with the band is a Gershwin piece. It's from the late 30s called Shall We Dance? I like playing that because I feel like it sets the scene for a performance if we're playing a dance. It's upbeat. I always hear Fred Astaire singing it in my head. It's got some wonderful witty lyrics from Ira Gershwin. And I think it's one of those pieces where it's in the back of a lot of people's minds from the era. They might have heard it from a film. It's been used in advertising. It's classy. And I feel like it sets up the stall for the orchestra for the rest of the night, saying this is what we're about. This is the signature sound of the band. You get to hear the arrangement that we've got features, it features the brass section, it features the sax section. Everybody gets to play a part. And it's a lovely, warm sounding arrangement. And it finishes on a wonderful crescendo. And it sort of sets the band up to take a bow at the end before we go into the rest of the night. So I think that is a wonderful piece to start. And yeah, I enjoy playing it. It's uplifting.
Almost like an overture.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, perfectly underscores everything that we're going to do for the rest of the night. So yeah.
And it's a great piece. It really is. What are some things that you'd love to play that you haven't had a chance to do yet?
I think if money and time permitted, I would love to enlarge the orchestra for an evening and play some more film type scores from the 20s and 30s. On our last album, we recreated some music from a forgotten film called Wake Up and Live from 1937. And the tune was Never in a Million Years. The problem with an 11-piece band or even with a 15-piece band is you can get close to that sound of a film score orchestra, but you're never going to get it exact unless you've got enough people playing the music. You need a full string section, you need a harp, you need two pianos, and you need a huge budget.
Yes, very much.
And you need a big recording studio. But that would be my sort of next ambition, to recreate some music from the films exactly, rather than doing a close second. I mean, I never feel like we do a close second. I feel like we always do something different rather than trying to do a copy that's not quite right. But I think I would like to, that would be my next ambition, would be to do sort of something with a 20-piece orchestra around that size, and then we could fully recreate the music of Paul Whiteman with Bix Beiderbecke and early Bing Crosby. I think that would be wonderful. But yeah, of course, you need deep pockets for that stuff.
Yeah. It does sound fantastic, though. I hope it's something you're able to do someday.
Yeah, I think as time goes on, we're attracting new fans and followers, and occasionally these people might be, in high finance or big business, and they say, I like the sound of that project, and can I be involved in that some way? So there's always scope with a band like ours to do things that other bands might not necessarily be able to do. So watch this space. You never know.
Yes, of course. You never know. I know you guys did the lockdown broadcasts, and you're making the best of a unusual situation. And how has the current situation affected your creative process and affected the band?
I think initially it was very frustrating because we had a whole summer and winter booked up with events, and we'd spent money on venues that then we couldn't get the deposits back. And I think, like a lot of other entertainers, performers, we lost a lot of money. And we had a cruise lined up that we were all excited about, going from, Southampton all the way to New York City, and a performance at the Rainbow Room at Rockefeller Center, which was going to be a big thing for us. But I think as time went on, we realized, okay, this isn't a short-term thing. This is going to be more long-term. And how can we get through this? How can we keep playing? How can we keep performing? So after a short term, we had some invitations to do some recording, socially distanced recording. There's a wonderful vocalist who was an icon in the UK, Dame Vera Lynn. She sang We'll Meet Again and Bluebirds Over the White Cliffs of Dover. She was a wonderful Air Forces sweetheart and very big in World War II. Anyway, she passed away sadly during the pandemic, and Decca Records invited us to come in. They found some recordings of her without a band from the 30s and 40s, and they said, how would you like to back Dame Vera Lynn? And so that was a wonderful project and kept us busy for a while. And we recorded a medley for Decca behind Vera Lynn, which was fun. And then we experimented with multi-track recordings at home, so everybody recorded their own part, and we did a 4 or 5 track broadcast of things from the 30s, which was a learning curve. And I set up a home studio along with everybody else in the band, which was interesting. And then things started to reopen a bit, and before you know it, here we are with hopefully, fingers crossed, we can perform again soon, more frequently. Things are starting to come in. People are starting to call and write and book, which is very positive and, exciting for the future of the band. I think during the pandemic, I think it's affected people's fortunes one way or the other. In our line of work, there were maybe several other bands that were performing this style of music. And I think, unfortunately, the pandemic has eclipsed those bands, and so there are only a few remaining now that are coming up. And we're coming out of the pandemic, I think, stronger than we went into it, because it's given us time to revise and think, what were we doing well, what weren't we doing well, how can we improve our image, how can we improve our music, who do we need to write to that we haven't written to before, what interviews do I need to do that I haven't done before, all of this kind of stuff. So it's been really useful in one sense, that you have to sit and really take stock of everything that you've done up to that point and what you're going to do when you come out of this. So it's been a weird time, but it's been good and bad.
Like you said, you've definitely come out stronger. And I think that all of the people in the creative and fine arts have really learned a lot of things about themselves and about the power of art, and how we handle situations as we emerge into this next section of time.
Yeah, sometimes you do these things, like you might run a band, or you're an artist or a painter or whatever, and you're sometimes not really sure about if people are who out there is appreciating this. And I think the one thing that the pandemic has taught me is that actually this music and what we're doing with the orchestra is very far reaching, and people have really taken us to their heart during the pandemic and said, we really hope that, really sorry to hear about what's going on with you guys. Hope you emerge well from this, and we're thinking of you. And I've had so many of these kind of messages. It's made me really appreciate the fans of the orchestra and think, well, they're there for us when the world reopens, which is nice. It's been a nice feeling. The support, yeah.
I was gonna say, you've built up such a wonderful group, and you have very high quality music, and it's just fantastic. It's, for me personally, as a lover of music, of that, putting your CD on as I'm commuting to work is just relaxing and soothing, or watching some YouTube videos, after a long week. It's just wonderful. It's just wonderful.
Oh, thank you. No, it means a lot to know that people are out there and they're enjoying this stuff. When I put the band together, I never did think that at some point there, people would be enjoying this music out in Texas, or, in Canada, or in Japan or Australia. But I think the one thing that the internet has done, it's made everything so instantly international. It's wonderful to be able to, in normal times, travel to the States or travel to Italy. Performed in Venice, we've performed in Russia, and it's so wonderful to bring this music to people in person. But during the pandemic, the internet has given us the ability to broadcast this music to new audiences all the time. So it's been great, and it's made me focus on the resources at hand. So I thought, okay, well, I can't perform for people in Tulsa or wherever in person, but we can broadcast over YouTube. So we've been doing live streams, and I think the pandemic has been sink or swim for a lot of people, and people can either give up and say, well, I run a band, and if I can't perform, that's it, done. Or you can grab the opportunity by the horns and say, okay, well, we're going to keep working, and we're going to keep playing, and we're going to put it on YouTube, or we're going to put it on Facebook or Instagram. And yeah, it's been good fun.
Yeah, it's definitely forced people to sort of think outside the box, so to speak, and see how they can push their own creativity to the next level.
Absolutely.
What is something that you wish you'd known when you first started your orchestra?
I thought that it would have been easier, to be honest, when I first started. I thought that the sheer novelty of a young orchestra playing the music of the 20s and 30s would be enough to garner press and would garner publicity, but it isn't. And I wish I'd have known that it would taken as long as it has to get the world's interest. But having said that, if I did know those things, I may not have started. So in a way, I'm glad that I was ignorant to some of the facts, because maybe I would have become a solicitor or worked in a bank or something. I don't know. But, knowing what I know now, maybe leading a 20s dance band may not have been the way forward. I wish I'd have had some of the contacts that I had in those early days to find the musicians and to find the work. But again, I mean, it's a lifetime's work. So building those, connections and things, it is difficult, but once they're in place, they're there for your career. So I've met some wonderful people, and I've worked with some great people, and I've seen a lot of the world that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. It's been up and down, but it's never been boring.
Understandable, for sure. What's one of the biggest sector of, the vintage music that you're curious about right now? Like, what's something that you want to learn?
I think it's the simple things, really, that are the ones that are always trickiest to master. I think that the band is like a machine. So every cog, every person plays a different part in this machine. My job as a band leader is really to keep the machine well oiled and to keep every cog functioning properly. Otherwise, the whole machine breaks down. And I think the things that I'm interested in most are the minutiae details, things like the rhythm section, making sure that everybody is feeling the same beat, the same pulse. I feel that the sax sections need to maintain that wonderful vibrato that, really plays as one man, or it shouldn't sound like 11 individual people. It should sound like one person. the big band, for it to really work well, and for the arrangements to work properly. Everybody should be feeling as though they're one person. For me personally, the thing that I'm always working on is not necessarily the music. I'm a vocalist for the orchestra, and I like to maintain my voice, and I like to practice singing. I enjoy that. But the one thing that I'm really zoning in on is to be an entertainer. I think that a lot of people miss that when they want to be musicians. They don't realize that you need to make wonderful music, but you also need to keep people entertained, especially when they come out to see a concert. I mean, the amount of times I've been to see a concert and you'll have a very stony-faced conductor, and he'll hate it when anybody applauds, and very serious, very strained look on his face. I want people to be enthused and excited to come out and to watch our performances. And so I think to get that kind of atmosphere, you've got to have fun with the music. And I look at all kinds of entertainers, not necessarily just in the jazz and big band world, but classical music and pop music, and see how can I incorporate those ideas. It could be Elton John, or it could be, Barry Manilow, all these older pop entertainers, but they have something that people enjoy and click with. And I sometimes wonder, how can I incorporate that into 20s and 30s big band performances where people can feel like they're not out of their comfort zone because it's something they don't understand. It's something that we're welcoming people into, and it's something that hopefully they can go away thinking, wow, I didn't think it was going to be like that. I thought it was going to be, Charleston and maybe something a bit antique, but it's got to be current and vibrant and immersive. I think that's what I'm working on all the time.
I definitely can tell, in watching the YouTube videos and hearing the records that I own of the band, there's such a passion for what you do. There's a true love there for the music, for this time period. And, I think you're going to continue to do great things. And I look forward to someday hearing you in person.
Yeah, I look forward to coming over and doing some more. We've never been to Texas, but that's on our bucket list, definitely.
Yeah, there's definitely some historic areas in the Houston area and around Texas that were definitely around, like certain theaters and things around in the 20s. And the town I live in right now has a theater. I am blanking on the name of it, but it was, I think, like a 1925 or something, or 1928 theater.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know if they've just recently restored it or they're going to restore it, but
I think there's a great movement in the US and in the UK now, where I think maybe like 20 or 30 years ago, if something was in need of repair, they might think, oh, okay, well, we'll tear that down and we'll build some apartments or something, or a parking lot. But I think that the feeling on that is changed because we've taken down so many things. I think that we're in danger of erasing a lot of our history. And I think now there's more of a concern, I think, for restoring or at least preserving some of our history. So in the UK, there are more theatres that are being restored, and I know that that's the case in the US as well. So I think the next 10 years is going to be exciting, seeing what venues crop up that can house the orchestra. Definitely excited about that.
Before we go, what does it mean to live a creative life, in your own words?
For me, to live a creative life is freedom, I think, a feeling of freedom. For many years, I come from a working class family, and the idea was security and working for somebody else and towing the line, or, knowing your place, doing what you should be doing. And when I made the decision to become a full-time musician, I think that my family were absolutely horrified. How are you going to get a mortgage? How are you going to pay for things? How are you going to get around? Where are you going to find your work? And I realized as time went on that they weren't my fears. They were the fears of my parents or the fears of my friends or my relatives. And so I think when you decide to become a creative person and work creatively, I think you need a good support team around you, people that can rally around you when you're not doing so well and to celebrate you when you are doing well. I think that really helps. And you've got to be positive and optimistic, because, there are so many lows with the creative industry, but then there are so many highs. It's like a roller coaster. That's what I say. But ultimately, I think if you are a creative person, you're only really ever truly going to be happy when you do that full time. And I found that over the last, I don't know, 5 years, I'm a lot happier. You know, the income isn't guaranteed and the gigs are not guaranteed, but ultimately, you know, your freedom is guaranteed. That's what it's all about, really, for me. And to be able to be your own boss and to make your own decisions and to do things for yourself.
Of course, and I think so many people in the creative and fine arts really cherish that. It's difficult to make a living, but I think the trade-off for people in those industries is, like you said, being your own boss, making your own schedule, being able to do what you love. It's a struggle, but being able to do what you love is the ultimate.
Definitely.
Excellent. Well, any last words before we sign off?
Nothing really, apart from it's been wonderful to chat, Tammy, and I hope that we get over to the US outside of California and New York and play some wonderful vintage theatres in Texas and all over. And thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And listeners, be sure to check out the show notes for links to Alex Mendham and his orchestra, various YouTubes, and the official website, and where you can buy CDs and support the band. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.